In true crime, most disappearances happen without witnesses. This one happened in front of a camera and still has no explanation. This is the disappearance of Brian Shaffer. Everyone who entered that bar was accounted for on camera. Investigators were unable to identify him leaving through the main exit on camera. The cameras were running the entire time. The building was sealed. The escalator was the only public way in or out. And yet, when investigators reviewed every frame of footage from that night, they were able to account for everyone who left. Everyone but Brian Shaffer. No gap in the footage, no missing frame. That is not a theory. That is what the footage shows. And 20 years later, no one has been able to explain it. Brian Shaffer was 27 years old. He was in his second year at the Ohio State University College of Medicine. By most accounts, he was social and well-liked. Someone his professors and classmates spoke of without hesitation. He played guitar. He was, according to his own MySpace profile, only doing the medicine thing temporarily, until he could get his band together and put out a record. 3 weeks before he disappeared, his mother died, and within weeks he would be gone. He had been studying for final exams. He was exhausted. He had a trip to Miami planned for Monday, a flight booked, a girlfriend waiting. On the evening of March 31st, 2006, he had dinner with his father at a steakhouse in Columbus. His father would later say Brian looked tired. The two parted on good terms. Brian went to meet his friend. That is the last verified account of Brian Shaffer that anyone outside the bar would ever give. The Ugly Tuna Saloon sat on the second floor of the Gateway complex on North High Street. It was a busy night, end of term, start of spring break. The bar was packed. To enter, you rode an escalator up from street level. A security camera pointed directly at the top of that escalator. It recorded everyone who went up. It recorded everyone who came back down. However, the cameras did not cover the interior of the bar itself. At approximately 9 p.m., Brian arrived with his friend William Florence, known to most people as Clint. The two had been roommates. They started the evening there, then moved on, bar hopping south along High Street. Like many others out that night, Brian had been drinking, though there is no indication he was heavily intoxicated. Around midnight, they ran into a woman named Meredith Reed. She drove them back to the Ugly Tuna for a last round. The camera recorded all three of them riding the escalator up at 1:15 in the morning. What happens after that is where the record becomes difficult to follow. At around 1:55 a.m., a camera outside the bar entrance captured Brian again. He was standing near the top of the escalator, speaking briefly with two young women he had apparently just met. The conversation lasted a few minutes, then Brian turned and walked back toward the bar's entrance. Back inside, that is the last time he is seen. The bar closed at 2 a.m. Clint Florence and Meredith Reed waited outside as the crowd came down the escalator. They expected Brian to appear among the other patrons. He did not. They tried calling him. The calls went to voicemail. Assuming he had simply wandered home, something he had apparently done before without notice, they left. By Monday morning, Brian had not returned to his apartment. His phone was still going to voicemail, and he had not shown up for his flight to Miami. His family called Columbus police. The investigation began. Investigators went through the footage carefully, frame by frame. They identified every person who left the Ugly Tuna Saloon that night, except one. One of the original investigators, Andre Edwards, would later state, on record, that based on the footage, investigators were unable to identify Brian Shaffer leaving through the main entrance. Not in disguise, not with his head down, not in a group. He simply did not come down that escalator. There was one other exit, A service door at the back of the bar led into a hallway, and from there to an employees-only exit. It opened onto an active construction site. At the time, the area included unfinished sections, equipment, and limited visibility. The cameras at that location were, according to reports, considered unreliable, some set to capture only still images at intervals rather than continuous footage. That door was not covered in the same way. Investigators searched the construction site. They searched the building from top to bottom, crawl spaces, the roof, maintenance areas. They found nothing. No physical trace of Brian Shaffer inside the building. At this point, one question remains that the evidence cannot answer. If he did not leave through the main entrance, and no camera shows him using the service exit, where did he go? In the days that followed, police interviewed more than 100 people. Everyone who had seen Brian that evening was asked to take a polygraph test. Brian's father passed, Meredith Reed passed, Clint Florence declined. Florence retained a lawyer and, according to reports, declined to participate further in the investigation beyond what he had already provided. Columbus police have never publicly named him as a suspect. No evidence connecting him to any crime has been made public. His attorney, in a 2008 letter to a private investigator working the case, suggested that Florence believed Brian was alive, and that if he had indeed left voluntarily, it was Brian, not Clint, who was responsible for his family's suffering. That letter raises an obvious issue. What it does tell us is that, for reasons that have never been satisfactorily explained, the last person confirmed to be in Brian Shaffer's company that night has consistently declined to submit to the one test that might have clarified his account. Brian's girlfriend, Alexis Wagoner, called his phone every evening for months after he disappeared. It almost always went directly to voicemail. But one night in September 2006, 5 months after he vanished, it rang 3 times, and then nothing again. Singular, his wireless carrier, later said the ring may have been the result of a computer glitch. That is possible, but it may not be the full explanation, because investigators would later confirm, and this detail was not made public for nearly 20 years, that there were reports that Brian's phone may have registered activity in the weeks following his disappearance, with signals connecting to different cell towers in the Columbus area. Investigators noted that this type of data is not precise enough to determine an exact location, and it has never been confirmed whether the phone was actively being carried or if the signals were the result of network inconsistencies. Police acknowledged the triangulation but said the method was not precise enough to identify a specific building. That is likely true. The technology in 2006 had real limitations. If accurate, such activity could suggest the phone was being carried, but investigators have never confirmed who, if anyone, was carrying the phone. This is where the case becomes difficult to explain. At some point during the investigation, the exact timing has never been fully confirmed. According to later investigative reports, a potential person of interest was identified during the case. These reports suggest that investigators examined a property connected to that individual, including a section of a basement that appeared to have been altered. A search was conducted at the location. They expected to find something. No remains or evidence related to Brian Shaffer were found. This information was not disclosed publicly at the time. It surfaced only in early 2026 through a combination of podcast investigators and source-based journalism, 20 years after the fact. When the Columbus Division of Police was contacted about the case, investigators declined to provide additional details. No explanation for that directive has been offered. Randy Shaffer spent 2.5 years looking for his son. He searched riverbanks in waders. He took calls from psychics. He lobbied the Ohio legislature to change how missing persons cases are handled, because at the time Brian disappeared, individual departments were left to set their own protocols, and some families felt the investigations had suffered as a result. In September 2008, a windstorm came through Baltimore, Ohio, where Randy lived. A tree fell. It struck him. He died without knowing what happened to Brian. Brian's younger brother Derek is now the only surviving immediate family member. He has largely stepped back from public statements. In a message released on the 20th anniversary, he said only that not a day passes without thinking about his brother, and that he hopes anyone who knows something will come forward. 20 years of tips, more than 5,000, according to some reports. A $100,000 reward, unclaimed. An age-progressed photo released in 2021, showing what Brian might look like at 42. A 2019 image of a man in Tijuana circulated online, analyzed by the FBI using facial recognition and ruled out. The ugly tuna saloon is closed. The building is still there. Retired Sergeant John Hurst, who led the original investigation and has never stopped following the case, stated in 2026 that he now believes Brian Shaffer is deceased. He believes foul play was involved. He is writing a book. He also said this: until someone comes forward who knows something, it will not be solved. And he believes that person exists. What remains, stripped of everything speculative, is a set of facts that do not resolve cleanly. A man entered a building and did not leave through any exit, captured on camera. There were reports that his phone may have registered activity in the weeks after he vanished, and that information was quietly filed away. A person of interest was identified, investigated, and not charged. The relevant property was searched, and the search found nothing. The department has declined to discuss the case publicly. Brian Shaffer was 27 years old. He had dinner with his father. He had a flight booked for Monday. He walked back toward the bar entrance at 1:55 in the morning, and the camera, pointed directly at the only exit, never saw him again. That is the last confirmed moment. There are a few things that remain genuinely unresolved. What was on that phone and who was carrying it? Whether the person of interest, whose name has now been supplied independently by two separate sources, will ever be publicly identified, and whether the department's silence represents an active investigation approaching a conclusion or something else entirely. The answers may exist. The evidence may still be in those 4 boxes of case files sitting in a Columbus police archive. Whether they ever become public is a different question.